Welcome to Learning South Africa's Languages, Episode 2. In this episode, I interview André, a PhD student at Boston University with extensive language learning experience, including languages like Arabic. With his strong background in linguistics and his passion for language learning, he's taken on the challenge of learning isiXhosa, a journey made even more unique by the fact that most of his learning has occurred outside of South Africa, with only one brief visit recently to South Africa. We'll explore in this podcast how his linguistic expertise has shaped his approach to learning isiXhosa. Well, lovely to meet you, and I'm really excited to hear how you got into learning isiXhosa. I'll usually just say Xhosa for short. But maybe if we can begin with just your background. And when we first got on the call, I kind of asked you, sounds like you have an American accent when you speak English. So you've been based in the US for the last 15 or so years, you said?
Yeah, so I am natively a French speaker, I learned German and Latin in school and English, and then I moved to the US, and I've just been speaking English all the time since then, and I took Arabic in undergrad for like 4 years, and I've taken isiXhosa 5 years now.
Okay, I see.
Just in my PhD program.
I see, okay. And
so the background was I was working on Khoikhoi in undergrad, and so it was a field methods course. I don't know if they do that in South Africa, but basically they have someone walk in on day one of class, you don't even know what language it is, and you start from scratch. And you spend your whole semester just working on this. Usually understudied language from scratch. I don't know if that exists there.
No, it sounds awesome. But from what I understand, we don't have anything similar to that. Where was that? Was that at NYU?
This is NYU.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
And so our speaker was from Namibia. She is a Damara Khoikhoi speaker. And I enjoyed it, but it's not like it's taught anywhere, So I picked the closest thing that seemed to be offered, which is isiXhosa.
Okay.
And it went well. Got, qualifying papers and dissertation out of it. So that's kind of the background of why I did it. I wanted to take a language. I was torn between that and Wolof, and I ended up choosing isiXhosa kind of on a whim.
Okay. Well, this was now when you started your PhD, is that correct?
Yeah, this was, I think, 5 years ago.
Okay. So what other options did you have available to you? So Wolof is one.
Mandinka, Akanshi, Igbo, Amharic, Kiswahili. Kinyarwanda, I think, was still offered at the time. More Arabic. Those kind of the options I was looking at.
Okay. And what was it about the proximity to the fact that maybe there was some link with Khoikhoi that had come from, that was during your undergrad that you did that?
My undergrad, was on Khoikhoi. I worked on Khoikhoi for over a year. So a lot of it was just, I knew I'd be working in Southern Africa for a while. Otherwise, I would have taken, Kiswahili or Wolof.
Yeah.
But I figured I needed background in a Bantu language, and it was between isiXhosa, isiZulu, and then Dr. Mali is a native speaker of isiXhosa, so I was like, why not just take her native language?
Okay, interesting. So to some degree it was, it could have been something else, it's just that was the closest at hand. That was within that region, it was a Southern Bantu language. Okay. Beyond the convenience factor, and I guess the relationship that it had to at least I'm not sure which of the Khoikhoi languages I'm not too familiar with, I guess non-Nguni or Sotho group South African languages. But was it mostly just the convenient factor? Was there anything else from what you'd learned about isiXhosa that interested you in particular?
I liked the idea of continuing to work with clicks.
Okay.
I learned how to do it, and then I thought I would maybe lose it if I didn't practice it. Starting it was a little bit on a whim. So.
Okay. That's interesting though, because
And,
I mean, I saw you'd also done something about whistling languages in Chivenda. Um, so is there,
oh,
do you have an interest in, I guess, things that are extraordinary forms of human language, whether clicks or whistling or things that kind of go above and beyond, um, maybe like, yeah,
yeah,
just
maybe.
normal mms, purrs, aspirates and,
Yeah,
okay.
that could be part of it. I definitely think I'm more interested in that than like, regular consonants.
Okay.
Um, that was from, I was working on basically the first semester of taking it. I ran into this thing where you say umama wam, which is my mother, but then if you want to be like, I don't know, cutesy or like loving, you say mamam.
Mm.
I don't run into this.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out what that was. As far as I knew, no one had written anything about it. And then I was supposed to go to Botswana. This was pre-COVID, to work on a core language. And so I started taking Setswana. Professor Mali has a friend also in Boston who speaks Setswana, so I took Setswana with her.
Okay.
And realized that Setswana also has this.
Okay.
And then I asked whether she has any other people who speak a South African language, and there was a Chivenda speaker in town. I think they all know each other through church, and so then I worked on that. And then with the Chivenda speaker, I realized, well, she volunteered that her brother had needed to learn how to whistle and could whistle full conversations,
Wow.
which seemed extremely unusual. And I had a hard time finding anything in the literature. No one seems to be writing anything. So that's how that all came. It was all from the isiXhosa class.
Okay.
And I had to work for it.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, because I wasn't aware. I mean, I've heard of whistled languages that have been in other places in the world, but I didn't know there was anything closer to home for me. So.
Seems to be every South African language. I found it in Shikhalahari, isiZulu, isiXhosa, Shivenda,
Oh.
Tswana. I think it's just across.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess this first part of the interview, I'm particularly just trying to build up a picture in my own mind of like what it is that makes you take something like this language. So you've given me, I guess, you had a series of options, and there was like an academic pathway that you had in terms of exposure to certain languages that kind of led to isiXhosa. I mean, in a broader sense, what was it that brought you to language as something that you would study? I mean, you also mentioned Arabic. I'm very curious about that. I've also done a little bit, kind of dabbled on the side, but like, yeah, what is it about languages? Have you always had a relationship to languages and language learning that has, like, it's always been a passion of yours? Are you like, do you enjoy the process, or is it more just like you try and understand all the systems? And like, what is it about language and language learning that interests you?
Well, I've always liked language, and I've always been pretty good at it, I think. And I actually wasn't intending on doing linguistics at all. I mean, I don't think anyone in high school knows what that is, usually. And so I thought I was going to do international relations and politics stuff. And I actually get into college and I realize I hate it and I needed something to switch to. And my roommate was in a linguistics class. I saw her homework. She was doing a homework on, I don't remember what, phonology homework. And I helped her solve it and I was like, oh, I could do this. So then I switched.
Okay. And I mean, if I understand correctly, it's like you don't have the option to take, I mean, at Rhodes University, for instance, in my first year, I took law, linguistics, English, and philosophy. In my second year, I completely changed it up. Do you have far more like structured programs that require you to take certain subjects, or can you mix it up like I was describing?
So there's a core curriculum. It's like this set of classes that you have to, or set of required credits that you have to fulfill regardless of what program you're in. So a lot of people in the first year are just doing those. And I was doing a lot of those. But I did have to kind of calculate it out because it was pretty tight to switch in my second or third year. And then I did a master's back in politics. The fifth year, they have these 5-year master's programs where if you do a major or minor in politics, you kind of just do a 1-year master's. And they used to have one for linguistics at NYU, and I think they will have one again. They're planning on bringing. But when I was there wasn't one in linguistics, but there was one in politics.
I see.
So I kind of went back to the politics department and wrote a linguistics thesis, but it's technically a master's in politics.
Okay, and what language was that linguistics thesis related to, or languages plural?
That was English. It was on political, like those people who do surveys on the phone, and I was looking at how much regional accent matters.
Okay.
As you get.
Okay, cool. Interesting.
Political, but it's still linguistic.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But it was just English.
Okay. Well, maybe then moving directly to also then, in the time that you started, so you obviously had some exposure to, like, I guess some of the features of African languages prior to that, and maybe you can just describe for me, like, at the beginning, before you started being taught by Dr. Mali, as she was your lecturer, and presumably, I don't know, did you have one-on-ones? But anyway, before we get to that, did you do any learning yourself? Did you, like, find any resources and try and start learning, or it was very much kind of an instructional way of entering into the language where you kind of waited for her lead on taking you through, the language learning process? But yeah, what was that inception like?
I walked in the first day having no knowledge of it and having not looked anything up.
Okay.
I had a basic idea of what was going on. I mean, I knew what a Bantu language was.
Yeah.
I knew what clicks were. But I figured I would just learn in class.
Okay, cool. And
there was no long-term plan to learn isiXhosa. It was kind of just on the class offering, and I wanted to take a language, and it was the best fit.
Okay, cool, interesting. And I mean, so you arrive, and what is it like? Do you have any classmates taking it with you?
I had one classmate. She was an undergrad, and it went very well. I think she was doing it for a language requirement, so I think she took 2 years, and then she was done. I learned really fast, much faster than I had Arabic, for example. Like, I was making a lot of progress very quickly, which was nice. Maybe it was partially from the small class, but or the professor, but I also feel like isiXhosa is not that crazy. Having learned Arabic, just isiXhosa, you just add the pieces and you're good to go. I mean, it's...
I've heard someone describe it in mathematical terms before. Like, it's kind of like you just, like algebraic terms, you figure out all the pieces and...
You add the pieces and then you're done, and it's fairly straightforward. Whereas Arabic's nothing like that. It's, thing just flips everything. So, yeah, I was enjoying it. I had a great time, and I was getting papers out of it, which was very helpful. And then she started taking me to conferences, and she was very proactive.
Okay.
Keeping me there.
So I'm curious, I mean, how much time did you actually spend in contact on a weekly basis learning the language? And how long also was the period of intensive learning? I mean, I saw that I looked at the BU website, and I think there were 4 courses. Is each one a semester long? Like,
So those are the ones that are just on public offer. As soon as you go beyond that, they just like formulate the class for you. They aren't going to have 10 empty classes every semester. They have occasional students. So I think it was an hour 45, 3.5 hours per week of face-to-face contact. And then another 3 hours of homework, more or less, usually.
Sorry, can you repeat
Um,
so how much face-to-face contact? Just missed that.
3.5.
Okay. Okay. And presumably then there was, like homework
We're,
and preparation for, class and things like that as well.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, about 3 hours of
And
homework.
beyond the second year, were you the only one who was having class? I mean, I don't know. Where are you in your PhD journey? Is it
No, I'm at the very end.
okay?
This is my last year. I would like it to be my last. Uh, so the first 2 years I was with this undergrad, and then she there was a student a year ahead of me in musicology. She works on South African opera, and she's American. And we were put in the same class, even though she was slightly ahead. And so then I was with her for the third year and the fourth year, actually. I was with her for 2 years. So it was a two-person class all the way through. And then the last year was just me by myself. She graduated.
I see. Okay. Interesting. And compared to I mean, you were comparing it with your progress with Arabic. Presumably, was it modern standard? And then I saw on your language chart, was it also Palestinian or Levantine?
Yeah, it was Levantine.
Okay.
I'm not sure how authentic it was. It was taught by an Iraqi professor.
Okay.
So couldn't judge. But I was in Palestine and I was speaking with people,
Okay.
and fine. I can't do that anymore. I forgot everything. But at a certain point, I knew it pretty well.
But you say that your progress with that, well, it was a lot like more of a struggle, say, than what it's been with Xhosa.
Yeah, it took more time.
Okay.
At least for isiXhosa, the writing system's not the issue, but it has a bunch of cognates and that you can lash onto, whereas Arabic kind of doesn't.
Cognates as in like cognate languages that would allow you to get it, or
It's in vocabulary.
okay. So like some Afrikaans derived words or English derived words, or
Yeah, there's a lot of English in there.
I don't know if
Yeah.
how many are coming from Khoi or San languages.
A lot of them, but it's not going to help me.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I'm sure. Also, I mean, with the German. With a German background, you'd identify certain words and kind of see, oh, I see where this came from.
Yeah.
Most recently, I discovered that Maskandi music comes from, I think it's musikant, which in Afrikaans is a
Oh, that
musician.
makes sense.
Yeah, which I didn't
Yeah.
realize. There's so many. It's funny as a South African. There's so many words which I think come from Xhosa or Zulu or something like that, and I can't see the original etymological kind of journey back to Afrikaans or to English just because the way it's spelt and the way it's pronounced is so different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So there was
I feel like isiXhosa is fairly straightforward. The phonology was never an issue for me.
Sure.
Because I came in knowing the clicks. And I came in, I think, knowing more clicks than isiXhosa has.
Yeah.
Because Khoi has the palatal series, and they have delayed aspiration, and they have all these other
Okay.
going on. So, and they have, and I worked on other languages with adjectives, and it was all fine on that end. So for me, it was mostly the syntax, which was very reasonable, and the lexicon, which is also very reasonable.
Okay.
The major issue has been tone, and I think a lot of learners don't even get to the point of trying to grapple with the tone, because you can kind of get away without doing it. But it's really tough to hear. And so this whistled language, while we were using the whistling for her to show me the tone, cross-linguistically, it's not just Xhosa. People really struggle to have internal intuitions about tone. So you can ask, a speaker of a Californian language or a Vietnamese speaker questions about tone, and they just can't self-intuit about it in the same way that you can like a P or an S sound. So we were using the whistling to kind of show the melody of each word so that I could start to get it, because, it has grammatical uses, it has all of these other uses in language. So that's kind of where this was starting.
Okay, so that's kind of been a difficulty, you'd say, just in terms of acquiring and becoming. Have you had any experience with Chinese, Mandarin Chinese?
No.
Okay, because I guess I spent some time learning that and I got to know a few tones, far fewer, say, than in Vietnamese, from what I understand. Vietnamese has quite a few. But I've always wondered, because in my learning of Xhosa, I've mostly, except in the case of like referring to you or he or she or it, usually he or she, maybe I just haven't kind of figured out which tone I should use to make the distinction between the two with like you. Yeah, so I haven't really spent much time, but I've always wondered, well, how similar are the tones and the different tones that Xhosa may have compared to Mandarin Chinese, which has like a rising tone, a sing-song kind of high tone, one that goes from sing-song to low, and then there's like one that goes from high to low to high again. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
At least for Chinese languages, a lot of the tones in place, and this is the same in languages. So I work on a language related to Ghana in central Botswana, and they have 6 lexical tonal melodies, and on the surface it's something like 12 through allophones, and the tones don't move. They sit in place, they're really well behaved, they look the same in all contexts. So even though there's a lot of them, you can kind of know what's going on, whereas these Bantu tones are just they move so much, and it's really rough.
interesting.
Like you start putting an affix on, and it like flips the preceding tone. So I do not pretend to have acquired
Okay.
the isiXhosa system. It's wildly complicated. Even though there's only 3 of them, they move around on things.
Okay.
So, in that sense, they're different. Whereas Mandarin tones also kind of stay put.
Yeah.
And they do change based on the surrounding tones in a very, very predictable,
Yes.
very few numbers of ways. So, yeah.
Okay, that's useful, because I've been completely ignorant of, I guess, the tonal side of Xhosa as a language.
Yeah, well, you can get away with it, kind of, in these Bantu languages, at least Southern Bantu languages, because I don't think it carries a lot of functional load.
Okay.
There's enough L2 speakers of isiXhosa that I think people are used to hearing mess up the tones.
Okay, yeah. I'm just trying to remember, there's
Like
one
the
word.
Setswana speaker is not doing it correctly, and that Shivenda speaker, who's trying their best in isiXhosa, is not getting,
Okay.
So they have like this of L2 speakers endemically that I think makes them more amenable to hearing or processing, tone errors.
Okay, interesting. I remember having a conversation somewhere, it's kind of close to Mthatha, about Itanga, and apparently there's four different ways you can say this word. It either means thigh or pumpkin, and then there's like 2 other meanings for it as well. Itanga, aspirated after the T. Yeah, but anyway, that's kind of like the go-to in terms of, and I'll just, in my mind, it's thigh and pumpkin, and that's enough. That's enough synonyms,
Yeah.
on the very basic level that I'm analyzing that word.
Yeah, I think each of them is distinct, because I have run into this set before. The other issue for tone is that most dictionaries are not marking it. You have most contrasts are written in the orthography, right? Virtually every consonant contrast, all 70-something of them, are represented in the orthography. So as a learner, you just look at the word and you know the system, and then you know how to say the word. Tone is not represented, and not only that, but even in dictionaries they don't put it. So there's this kind of methodological problem when you're trying to learn it.
Sure.
That there's way to acquire tone because no one has the information. And you can't hear it because you're,
yeah.
not a Bantu language speaker.
Sure.
So yeah.
So what about other? So I mean, when I've spoken to quite a few people who learned the language, particularly who are white South Africans, they come from a very bookish background, so they've gone to good schools, they're very used to learning through books. Some of them maybe are also just good at picking up languages just through interactions with people, but nonetheless, it seems as if for a lot of learners here, second language or additional language learners, they develop a very bookish form of the language, and then they almost need to be disabused of a lot of the forms that they've picked up as they learn how people have actually speak the language. And also, I guess, given the history of writing down Xhosa, and I think it was from one specific dialect, and there's been so much language change and shift since then, and there are a bunch of other dialects, and so yeah, often people have a difficulty in picking up how people actually speak, and there's a tendency to be much stronger in the standardized forms. So I'm curious on that side, how did your lecturer, what form of language did you learn through her? And then also, did you try and go beyond that and learn a more colloquial version, or what forms of language have you learned?
So this is kind of an issue for any language, right?
Yeah.
specific to isiXhosa. It's more extreme in Arabic, but it's certainly true in French and German and even English, Excuse me, miss, you have lost your purse. That, no one speaks like that. But so I actually found the divide in isiXhosa not to be that extreme between the standard and the colloquial. And there are some forms that they truncate, and what often is happening is in colloquial speech is they're code switching, and they're code switching to English, which I know, so it's perfect. Actually, the feedback I was getting from young speakers is, oh my gosh, your isiXhosa is so proper, and they were referring to the fact that I wasn't code switching.
Okay.
The English mainly. So it's kind of best case scenario for me as an English speaker, but it also means I don't really know how to code switch into English. Okay. I don't know which parts are fine and which ones aren't.
Yeah.
Because if you code switch in the wrong place, it's going to be really weird to the point of not understanding it. So, that's been basically my observation. The colloquial version has a lot of Afrikaans and English in it. Those are the major differences that I see. In terms of how she made sure I got used to that, I was listening to radio programs where people speak like this, and it was okay. I think it was good. The biggest issue was the Afrikaans words. I just don't know them. Yeah, so I would get about 80% of it because 20% of it was Afrikaans.
So did you struggle, moving from, say, the written forms of the language to listening to radio programs? I'm not sure which radio or podcast you listen to. I remember trying. I think it was an educational podcast from Umhlobo Wenene FM. I don't know if you encountered Umhlobo Wenene.
I encountered that one. It was something else, but I don't. So yeah, moving to listening is that I think it is for all languages I've encountered. With reading, you just take your time, and if it takes you 20 seconds, it takes you 20 seconds. When you're listening, you have to kind of keep up.
Okay.
And in that sense, isiXhosa was kind of ordinary.
Okay.
Because kind of a normal challenge and a normal milestone, but it was tough, And I would be listening. So a lot of my homework assignments, I chose to do SABC news segments. I would transcribe the first 3 minutes, and all of a sudden they would, move to someone talking about something in the field, right? And they were speaking isiZulu. And so all of a sudden my intelligibility went way down. Not to zero, but way down. And then immediately after that, it's a Shitsonga speaker. The nature of South African news is none of it has subtitles, none of it is maintained. Just everyone kind of understands what's going on intuitively, at least in the Nguni languages. But that was good, a good exercise. I wasn't always sure people were even speaking isiXhosa the whole time,
Yeah. I've definitely also encountered that, just hearing something that's like, why do I not understand this? Sounds so similar. But it's Sindebele or isiZulu or something like that. Okay, that's interesting. So you mentioned then doing transcriptions, and I encountered someone else who actually she's foreign and learned Xhosa in Cape Town, and she was doing research in a predominantly Xhosa-speaking township area, and was, for her main way of learning to hear, as she put it, was through doing transcriptions of interactions that she was having, and asking questions, and then just figuring out how people actually speak based on that. So yeah, I mean, do you think that was quite fundamental to being able to hear, or was there anything else that was particularly helpful?
It was useful. It allowed me to learn the elision processes. So
maybe can you just explain like what you mean by elision processes?
Yeah. So basically, ubona, right, to see. That ku disappears a lot. So when you're reading, it always looks like ubona. But when they're speaking, 80% of the time it's ubona. That ku disappears. And then the final vowels are usually deleted because the next thing takes its place. And so I suppose that's what you were talking about when you were asking about the colloquial version or the spoken version, is that a lot of things do delete or reduce or come out differently. The future tense is when speaking is different as opposed to written. So the zakubona becomes the zobo. So in writing, it's always the zakubona. And in speaking, it's almost always the zobona. And so writing it out kind of forced me to internalize those rules.
Okay.
I would hear a missing ku, and then I would be able to put it in when I'm writing it.
Yes.
When I didn't, we would go back through it, and she would be like, "Oh, there was one there." And I would listen to it, and I'd say, "Oh, yeah, there it was."
Okay.
It disappears completely. There's like a trace of it in the speaking, but you really have to know it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like it doesn't sound like ku. It's this little tiny lip.
And so I'm curious, like in learning methods like that, I mean, if you could call it a method or a technique, the involvement then of your lecturer in helping you like hear what you're missing, or like making you notice things that you're like, how much would you attribute to her almost intervention in your learning, helping you just to learn a lot quicker on things which were otherwise would be like you are intuiting based on doing some transcribing, but now she's saying, well, actually this thing that doesn't make any sense, or you're missing out this thing here. Like how much of that was central to you picking things up quicker?
Probably 80% of it.
Okay.
If I was doing it alone, I would have just been floundering in wrong judgments and kind of walked in circles.
Okay.
So she was really, really helpful. The feedback was always useful.
And would that be in tutorials or in lectures with the other student, one of the other two students?
This would be with the other two students.
Okay.
Because we find the same passage.
Okay.
Or less. Or I would do it by myself, and then she would give me feedback one-on-one. It just depended. Yeah.
To what extent would you say having one other person was ideal? I don't know what your class sizes of other languages has been like. I mean, I've been in classes where there's like 30 other people, and also classes where there's 2 other people. And certainly I find sometimes it takes the pressure off just having one classmate or two classmates, because you can listen to their mistakes or listen to them kind of hearing something that you don't, and you can learn a lot through that. What was your experience?
I think you can go a lot quicker. When you're in a 20-person class, they kind of can't leave, 5 people in the dust. That's not, morally. So my Arabic classes were slower. They were big. They were like 20 people. And they were slower. And even pushing, the class very fast and having people drop because it was too fast. It was still quite slow. I felt like at some point, especially when we're talking about formal aspects of grammar and trying to teach phonological rules to people who are not in any way trained in language. A lot of these people were security studies people that I struggle to respect, but they, we're normal people. And so things that are resolved in 3 seconds because you're like, oh, this is the remote pass, takes a study.
Okay.
And, things like that. So I think having is useful, but that's just because I am a trained linguist, and I think shortcuts in terms of the grammar and learning phonology, I think it helps a lot.
And then, so just in terms of, we'll move past kind of the way in which you learned soon, but what were the main ways that you were taught? Like, what kinds of exercises did you do? Was there equal time kind of spent on all of the 4 language skills? So clearly doing some transcriptions. What else did you do?
I read novels. I was reading short stories, and then we worked our way up to books. And so that was the bulk of my homework, actually, was that. In class, it was almost all conversation. Whatever time was not spent reviewing the homework. After year 2, it was just conversation for an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
Twice a week. And so that's how my speaking got, I think, up there. None of it was reading in class. None of it was writing in class. That was all done outside of class.
Okay.
It was these long-winded conversations about where I'd been that weekend, what I was doing this week, had I heard this news, whatever she wanted to that week. It worked. It was very helpful.
And then at which point did presumably you've learned how to talk about the process of learning and, like, I guess, talking about grammar and sentences and like phrases and all these words which maybe if you are a first language speaker, you just speak the language, you don't know how to describe. Like, at which point then were you manipulating language using the language to learn more, like where you didn't really need to rely on English at a certain point?
I got a monolingual dictionary, which was useful. Then I would look up a word that I didn't know. That'd be in the definition. And then there'd be a word in the definition that I didn't know. So then I would look up the definition of that, which then I understood. And so I kind of did the whole process just in isiXhosa.
Is this all in the course of like a lesson?
Oh, this would be at home. In the lesson, I would be asking questions about the language. I would say, how do you say, and then you talk around it, trying to find the word. My classmate did tend to use English to ask these questions, which is fine. Some people do better with that. But I was always trying to speak isiXhosa and to ask the grammatical questions. And sometimes it would just confuse her, so we would switch to English, doing not a great job.
Okay.
Because they have these words. They have the word for noun, verb, adjective, past tense. Like, they have all these technical terms. And some of them now, like the word for consonant and vowel, but a lot of them I don't know. And so I'll either phonologize it from English or I'll talk around it.
Okay. Brief aside, do you know the word for click sounding also? Yeah, okay. Okay. I've asked also speakers about that, but it doesn't seem like they're familiar with
No,
the term.
no, this is all technical vocabulary. Like the word means comrade,
Mm,
and they would twist it for the word for consonant, but go to a normal, person, a cashier or a gas station attendant,
mm.
they don't know the consonant meaning. They'll say, oh, okay, my comrades. Like,
Sure. Okay. Last question
so I
then.
think that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just within 1 week then, over the last 5 years, how much time would you estimate, both, time, contact hours, and then just reading or preparing for class? How much time would you say you've spent?
Probably 10 hours.
10 hours a week.
So our classes often went.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say 10 hours.
And that's like for, I don't know, 40 weeks a year for the last 5 years?
Closer to 30 weeks a year.
Okay. Just trying to get a sense of, yeah, okay, interesting. And so like you feel comfortably fluent then when you would speak with someone? Like
Yeah, I had no issues.
Okay.
I gave the presentation at Rhodes, and a few days before I'd given a similar presentation at the University of Fort Hare, where I basically gave this full talk in isiXhosa to an isiXhosa audience, and it went very well. So I felt good about it. I have no issue talking to anyone. Some people want to speak English because they feel weird.
Yeah.
But usually I can insist and they go along with it.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be keen to dial a bit deeper into that weirdness. Like it feels weird to speak English. We speak also with you.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just quickly. We've covered quite a bit. I feel now I have a handle on how you went about it, and I mean that's a significant amount of time over the course of those years that you invested in it. So, yeah. So I mean, you were obviously here in South Africa recently. How many times over the last while? Also, COVID happened, so I'm sure there wasn't too much international travel. But like, how much time have you spent in also dominant areas in South Africa, or indeed engaging with people, virtually as well, who is not your professor? So a question of exposure.
Basically 2 weeks this summer. That was it.
That was it. Wow. Okay.
Never been. I'd been to Limpopo. I'd been to Venda last year to work on the stuff there, but there were no Xhosa speakers there.
Okay.
There was one or two, but no, it hardly counts.
Okay.
It's not like you were seeing everywhere and talking to people every day with it.
Interesting. And I mean, what are your? I mean, this is a question I would have. Like, where are you going with your also skills? This linguistic capital that you've developed now. Like, what are you going to use it for? Beyond.
I don't know.
Beyond, I guess, a career in linguistics, academic career?
I would like that. It's competitive. We'll see what happens. Yeah, I'll certainly continue working in Africa. I just need to, and specifically in the Eastern Cape, I just need to sort out my career this next year.
Okay.
And then work from there. I'm planning on returning to Botswana soon. I have a few projects that I'm trying to work on. But yeah. We'll see what happens.
Have you been approached by anyone to teach also to them?
No, and also I would feel weird doing that. Give the job to a Xhosa speaker.
Yeah.
I don't accept it.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I suspect if you spend more time in South Africa, you'd get quite a few people asking you to teach, whether mother tongue, first language Xhosa speakers would say, hey, you should teach the language to...
My professor's already saying that, and I could teach French. I mean, and I'm much better at French. So
yeah, it seems like there's an interesting conversation about, like, for second language learners, is it useful for someone who's a first language speaker teaching versus someone who's actually like traversed the pathway of acquiring a language as a second language learner with a similar linguistic background? And I think there's pros and cons to both. Like both kind of teachers being involved in a learner's journey.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've had second language teachers who learned the target language as a second language, who were very good and different things. So I agree with you completely. I mean, I've never had a formal offer, so we'll see if that ever happens.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And then I guess another question I have is, in your time of learning, I mean, it's been a good number of years now, have you encountered anyone else, maybe, overseas? And I know there's Afrikanistic departments in Germany and the German-speaking world. There's a few universities in the States that have Southern African languages that are taught. I knew of Boston University. I think there might be a few others as well. Like, have you met other people who've reached the point of fluency in Xhosa, who is obviously not a heritage language learner of any sort?
Yeah, my classmate was basically there too.
Okay.
He has actually come to South Africa very often.
Okay.
She was there like last month, but she was in Cape Town.
Okay.
So it was just a meet up. But yeah, she's there too. She is at that level.
What is her
otherwise?
What is her heritage or background?
She's an English speaker from Virginia, outside D. So no familial connection to South Africa.
Okay. That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear her story as well.
I could try to connect you. I would have to ask around. I don't know what her contact information is anymore.
Okay. Okay, that's fascinating.
Certainly be happy to talk.
Yeah, no, I'd be keen to follow up on that. Have you heard of anyone else that has been successful in learning? Any former students of your lecturer?
Well, yes, but I haven't because she teaches both isiXhosa and isiZulu. So I know some of her former isiZulu students who became very fluent. I know that at Howard, they have a very advanced program. So Howard University, yeah. It's a historically Black university, and they have a massive African languages program.
Okay.
Might be bigger than every other school combined in the country.
Oh, wow.
So hundreds and hundreds of people. And then I met one girl who learned isiZulu and knew it well. Forget if she was at Yale or at Indiana. But there's a couple of people just floating around who take a lot of this language and then kind of move on. And
okay. I'm curious, I guess, the diversity of motivations out there. So it seems from your side, it's very much like, I guess, a linguistic focus and an interest in this specific region. But yeah, I mean, maybe more cultural foci could be out there, and who knows, other reasons as well. Because so often, I guess, the motivations you have determine the way in which you learn. And I mean, you were just describing you had a lot of like linguistic leg ups. That just enabled you to take shortcuts in the learning process simply because you didn't have to like understand the grammatical principles, which whereas in some of my research I've found that, and it's just a hypothesis, but it seems like for many people the phonology, because they're used to attending to sounds, so they have musical training of some sort, they sang in choirs, then they often, those kind of people seem like they learned an African language within the South African context easier compared to other people. There was just a predominance of musically trained people, which is just interesting. But so like when you mentioned ethnomusicologist, I find that interesting.
Yeah, that's more prototypical maybe. Well, about this whistling thing, it was in class with her, and she had never understood the tones. She vaguely knew they existed. We'd had a little bit of overt training from Professor Mali about specifically this oo and oo distinction for the subject pronouns. And a couple others she would try. It wasn't a lack of effort, it wasn't a lack of skill on her end. I just don't think the methodologies are there. like in the field. As I was talking to Yoruba teachers and Igbo teachers, and the amount of, or Akan Tree, I mean, Akan is insanely tonal. And they don't do a lot of tone teaching, you know? And so a lot of their students are heritage speakers, and then they kind of get around the whole issue because the students come in already knowing it. But I don't think that the methodologies for teaching tone are quite there yet. You know, Mandarin has been around for talking about this issue for a long time. So I think there's a little bit of a gap. But as soon as she started whistling, all of a sudden, both me and my classmate were getting it. So we have these names. Her name was Fundiswa, and she didn't know the tones of her own name until we did the whistling thing, and then she got it. It's high, low, high. And me is si, po, low, high. Yeah, so it's all of a sudden very clear when they whistle it.
Very
and
interesting.
they all do this.
Yeah, I'm keen to look more into that. Okay, what has the reception been to you as a speaker? I mean, obviously within the US is a very different context to the Eastern Cape. You've had some experience down the Eastern Cape, and like you mentioned a little bit about your reception at University of Fort Hare. But yeah, what has your reception been as a foreigner who's learned it, largely out of the country? How do people respond to you?
Yeah, so in the US, it's this nebulous thing. No one's ever heard of this language, and it's just another language that I know because they know I speak French. They know it. In South Africa, they're always just very surprised, and usually will try to switch to English unless I've been introduced already. So if I'm with my professor and she is leading the conversation in isiXhosa, sometimes they'll address me in isiXhosa, but even then, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll switch to English, and I have to respond in isiXhosa. Sometimes a couple times to kind of make clear that I want to speak it. No, never hostile. Some students, want to test me. They'll point at a tree and say, "What's that?" I respond something like, "I don't know the name of that specific tree, but it's a tree." Yes, or ask them, "What's the specific name of that tree?" And they don't know either.
Sure.
It's overwhelmingly positive. I went to a restaurant and I was speaking with the staff in isiXhosa, and they just gave me free beers, But I was getting addressed in Afrikaans a lot, and I don't understand Afrikaans. I think Dutch people might be able to, and I understand Dutch all right. I've been to the Netherlands. I can kind of out. But Afrikaans is just a step too far for me.
Okay.
Eligibility. And so I never understand what they're saying. And sometimes I'll respond in isiXhosa because I don't know what else to do.
Interesting.
And that always shocks them.
Okay, interesting. So I'm curious, when you've had your interactions with other first language Xhosa speakers, was that primarily in like an urban environment, and then in maybe with students at University of Fort Hare, or at Rhodes?
Yeah, predominantly.
Okay.
Predominantly.
Did you have any interactions with deeply rural people?
Yes, because we were also visiting some of her friends who are these, older women living in the villages, and they would always, cook for us, and, very nice experience, but I had forgotten that I had met all these old women.
Okay, and what was the linguistic dynamic there in terms of, was English present at all, or they didn't attempt to speak to you in English?
No, I think some of them didn't even speak English, honestly.
Okay.
Not that I was testing them.
And one other question I'm curious about, engaging particularly with men, maybe younger men, did you notice any gender differences in terms of the way men speak compared to women? Particularly youth.
Yeah, I find women a lot easier to understand, but I was taught by a woman.
Yeah.
So some of the men can be a little tough to understand for me. Yeah, there's differences.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That's also what you say.
Especially young men. I just use a lot of slang that I don't know and that my teacher doesn't use.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. What you're saying is what many others have said that I've spoken to in my own experience as well. Yeah, it's a lot easier, I think, to learn and to just for one thing, in terms of pronunciation, like not swallowing words. I mean, that's one way of putting it, but yeah, and then the slang thing as well. Okay, maybe just ending it off. Are there any specific proverbs or sayings or words or phrases in Xhosa that you particularly love, or any aspects of the grammar that like shocked you or amazed you or you love or you dislike intensely? Like, what are your favorites and hatreds?
There's nothing I hate in the language. There are some consonants I wish that there were more of. You know, like some of them are very low frequency. You know, just a couple of words or 3 words that the normal person will know. And some of them are very cool consonants that I wish there were more of.
Linguistics kind of answer consonants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the grammar, one part that I struggle with is, I forget what the term for it is. It's in relatives. There's this yo piece that I still struggle to know where to put. So something like tu endim bonayo, the person who I'm seeing. This yo thing comes and goes, and it's hard. I still struggle. So, and then a proverb that I like. Well, I like the idiophones, the grammatical class.
Favorites? Any specific favorites there?
Ukuti, like to just show up.
Okay.
I like that one. Like to just disappear or be gone. I like that one. So I use them more than I think the average person, the average isiXhosa speaker does. I use them a lot in writing. And a lot of those are not in dictionaries. I suspect what happened is they look at the English and Afrikaans dictionaries as kind of their starting point, and none of those have idiophones because those are not major word classes for us. And so they kind of didn't put a lot of these idiophones, even though they are these major word classes. So as a learner, it can be a little tough because these things, you have no way of assessing them. Okay, what else? A proverb, kabantu. I know it's basic, but it was class 1, and I liked it, and it worked for that level. Yeah.
Cool. I know that I said that was the last thing, but I realized there is one more thing, because you've kind of made some mentions of it throughout. Was there any particular media or books or like grammars or dictionaries that really you felt were like top-notch? Because I mean, I know that there's some really, including also literature maybe that you read that you just felt was great and you'd almost make a shout out to it.
I thought the history of the Amabata was good. Makaula, Imbali Amabata. I enjoyed a lot. I read a lot like Julius Caesar. It was just, then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It wasn't a whole lot.
Where did you get that from? Was it from the library or did you have a digital version?
He provided materials. I don't know where she got it. Okay.
Because I think that's one of the things that most people struggle with is finding good materials, particularly from an intermediate level and above. It's like either deep end reading literature that was written for first language speakers or like the Bible or something like that. Or it's super like early stage stories for children, which have a lot of very onomatopoeic words and things like that, which like people don't use in normal life. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, it's a little infantilizing, you know. No, she's built up a collection, but she has kind of talked about how difficult materials are to get. So the ones she has, she kind of like really holds on to. Sure. And one of the points of going to South Africa was to go to these bookstores and try to find new materials. A lot of these printing presses and publishers don't ship anywhere, so you really just have to go to their outlet or, you know, the general small area where they. Yeah.
Interesting.
I was finding that in Botswana as well. Like there's all these books that they publish on, plants or whatnot, and it gets published very informally in a spiral bound notebook, and it's in one bookshop.
Sure.
So it can be tough to access.
Any specific dictionary that was great? I mean, you mentioned which one was that?
So I have the South African Lexicography Unit Dictionary. That's bilingual. And that one I've had a lot of issues with. Specifically, they try to mark this H distinction, right? There's a voiced H and a voiceless H. And so they mark it on words, but 90% of it is wrong as far as, or like wrong for the speakers that I'm working with.
Okay.
So just highly dyslexic. But a lot of the information I was getting, so I was trying to run these experiments where, I'm testing this difference between the H's, and they just are all coming out as the voiced one, because all the voiceless ones that in the dictionary are voiced for these speakers. So I was having a little bit of trouble with that. I also have the monolingual dictionary. I forget what it's called. And then isiXhosa, I don't remember.
Okay, yeah.
I don't have a ton of monolingual dictionaries floating around. So if you have one in mind, it's probably that one.
I don't know. Actually, I've never ever seen one. So I'll go and look for it after this, but I've never seen one before. I've seen bilingual.
I ordered it on Amazon, and then I got a copy of the Greater isiXhosa Dictionary when I was in the Eastern Cape. I mean, it's huge. It's a giant, heavy book, and I struggled, but I have one of those now. But I didn't until August.
Okay.
Mainly the Lexicography Unit Bilingual Dictionary and a monolingual dictionary that I found online.
Okay, sure. Yeah, like that's interesting. I guess the base, almost pedagogical media that you used then would have come from your professor.
Virtually all of it, yeah.
Interesting, yeah, because often
SABC posts stuff on YouTube virtually every day. It posts its news segment, so that also was a nice resource.
Okay.
For homework, I would just do the one they posted that day. And then it was always like recent things.
Okay.
And that way she would also be learning something, usually in class. She's like, I didn't know there was a landslide.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate just getting a bit of an insight into your journey. I mean, super unusual, obviously, just globally to learn this. But even like within South Africa, there's just so few learners who reach a stage that you reached, beyond intermediate. Even to intermediate, I think is highly unusual for second language learners.
Yeah, across the board. Like the vast majority of French learners don't get far, right? And then the ones who are in France, running around are few and far between considering who they started with.
Yeah.
The percent of the cohort ends up getting to that level. I think it's pretty common in a lot of languages.
Yeah, no, I appreciate. I think there's a tendency to kind of narrow down to your specific linguistic silo, and for me, it's been African languages, and I tend to generalize that things are bad there. But yeah, you're right. It's across the board with second language learning, especially in this day and age where it's becoming increasingly less necessary, arguably.
Yeah, everyone speaks English. I went to my hometown in Switzerland, and everyone understands English. Better than I can speak isiXhosa. I think everyone's proficiency in English is also very high at this point.
Yeah.
It makes life easy if you want to travel, right? But
cool. Well, Andre, maybe we'll leave it there, and I'll formally end the interview, and then we'll just chat a bit afterwards.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks for listening to this episode of Learning South Africa's Languages. If you enjoyed what you heard, let us know in the comments section or via social media, and please share this with someone you know would be interested in it. If you know anyone who'd be a great guest, please reach out. You can also follow Language Learning SA, which publishes this podcast, on all the main social media sites. Our aim is to centralize information, media, and resources to help learners of South African languages. If you found resources, media, teachers, or schools, or something that helped you or somebody you know, let us know and we'll be sure to add it to our database. Thanks for listening.